Australia, 1932. In the midst of the Great Depression, as countries struggled to recover, the Australian government decided to launch the strangest war in its history. It wasn't a battle for territory, not against rebels, nor between nations. It was a war against birds. Sounds absurd, right? But the reality turned out far more dramatic than it seems. Huge, fearless, fast birds, emus, that couldn't fly became such a serious threat that the Australian Army was forced to launch a full-scale military operation against them. What happened next went down in history as the Great Emu War. After World War I, Australian farmers were in dire straits. Crop prices plummeted, markets collapsed, and growing anything became unprofitable. The government, worried about food shortages, ordered farmers to plant wheat on a massive scale, promising to buy it at decent prices. Farmers agreed, sowed their fields, and spent their last savings. But when the harvest came, the government broke its promise and offered prices far below what was promised. In despair, many farmers left the crops unharvested. And just when people were expecting locusts or rot to destroy the fields, nature played a much weirder card. Hundreds of thousands of emus began migrating. After breeding season, they normally wandered in search of food and water. But that year, their path led straight through the wheat fields of Western Australia. There, surrounded by golden crops, these giant birds found their paradise. Just think, one adult emu can weigh up to 45 kilograms and eat up to 2 kilograms of grain per day. Now imagine 20,000 of these hungry invaders storming fields and destroying up to 25 acres of crops a day. At first, farmers tried to handle it themselves, with sticks, traps, and shotguns. But it quickly became clear. This wasn't just a nuisance, it was a disaster. When the scale of the damage reached the government, they made a shocking decision. Bring in the army. Yes, officially, the military, with rifles, machine guns, and ammunition, was sent to fight birds. The press dubbed the operation the Great Emu War. At first, soldiers chuckled. After surviving World War I, wild birds didn't seem like a threat. But reality slapped them hard. As soon as the troops arrived, torrential rains began. The emus scattered across a massive area, becoming nearly impossible to locate, let alone shoot. When the rain finally stopped, the army launched their first assault. They spotted a few emus near the village of Campion and tried to surround them, but local villagers threw stones and scared the flock. The emus bolted. These birds run up to 70 kilometers per hour, too fast for any ambush. The soldiers opened fire and managed to hit 5 birds out of 20,000. It was a total flop. The first operation ended in failure. The army didn't give up. A few days later, they tried a second ambush. They hid among the wheat stalks, waited patiently. About 1,000 emus entered the fields again. The soldiers opened a hail of bullets, but fate laughed again. Just a few dozen rounds in, the machine gun jammed. By the time it was fixed, all the birds were gone. Another failure. It became increasingly clear these emus weren't just birds. They were tactical units. After 2 failed attacks, the military realized, despite their comical looks, emus were smarter and quicker than expected. So they planned a third strike. This time, they moved south of Campion, where emus were reported in large numbers. And there, something happened that stunned even the most seasoned soldiers. They noticed a strange pattern. The birds didn't run around randomly. They were organized. Soldiers realized emus moved in groups, and each had a leader, the tallest and most alert, constantly scanning the surroundings while the others fed. As soon as this leader spotted danger, he signaled the group, and they scattered instantly. These weren't just birds. They were strategists. The same army that had recently crushed enemies in World War I was now outwitted by a feathered force. So they came up with a bold new plan. No more ambushes, they'd go mobile. They mounted a machine gun onto a truck, aiming to chase down the emus and shoot them while driving. On paper, it looked brilliant. In reality, a disaster. The ground was uneven and soft. The birds ran chaotically. Aiming from a moving vehicle was nearly impossible. Most shots missed, and the gunner could barely hold on. And then came the final humiliation. During one chase, an emu somehow crashed into the truck, got stuck in the steering gear, and caused the vehicle to veer off into bushes. No emus were harmed, but the truck destroyed. In that raid alone, the army fired over 2,000 bullets and killed only a handful of birds. It wasn't a victory. It was a mockery. The war against the emus was becoming more absurd by the day. Command paused the operation. The army needed to regroup and rethink its strategy. Weeks later, the troops returned, better prepared and with a new plan. This time, they worked closely with local farmers, setting up traps, watch posts, and coordinating movements. And for the first time, it actually started to work. Within just a few weeks, around 1,000 emus were killed, but the celebration was short-lived. Once the reports started coming in, it became clear. An average of 10 bullets were needed to kill a single bird. Over 10,000 rounds had been used. With such poor efficiency, the operation looked like a colossal waste of money and resources. When the issue reached Parliament, it sparked a real scandal. One MP even joked that if anyone deserved medals, it was the emus, for their agility, cleverness, and astounding survivability. In the end, the military operation was officially declared a failure and shut down. The birds had won. Australia had lost a war to birds. But that wasn't the end. What the army failed to do, the people decided to take into their own hands. After the military's very public embarrassment, the Australian government stepped back, saying it would no longer interfere. Yet the problem didn't disappear. The birds kept destroying crops. Farmers were losing everything. Public anger was growing. Then came a desperate decision. If the army couldn't handle it, let the people try. The government launched a new plan, a mass distribution of weapons to farmers and a bounty system that rewarded them for each emu killed. It was a desperate but cunning strategy. In every region, stations were set up to provide guns, ammunition, training, and most importantly, forms to claim monetary rewards for confirmed kills. Each dead emu meant money in a farmer's pocket. A nationwide hunt began. Within months, thousands of citizens took up arms. They treated the emus as if this was a personal war, and at first, it looked like things were turning around. But the more hunters went out into the fields, the more obvious it became. This still wasn't easy. Once again, emus adapted. They started moving at night, traveling in small groups, hiding in dense brush. Some hunters even claimed the birds were using decoy tactics, distracting humans with false movements while others escaped. It started to sound less like pest control and more like guerrilla warfare. People began to believe these birds had almost supernatural survival instincts. Still, the bounty system began producing results. Within 6 months, over 57,000 rewards were handed out, meaning at least 57,000 emus had been killed. It looked like a victory, but not so fast. Just then, the story took a new and unexpected twist. International media picked up on it. Reports, articles, and photos of Australians posing with the massive bird corpses began appearing in newspapers around the world. With each passing day, global outrage grew. Animal rights organizations slammed Australia with harsh criticism. They accused the country of cruelty, genocide, and the destruction of a unique species. Shockingly, abroad, emus began to be seen as victims, even symbols of resistance and natural power. The Australian government was caught in a crossfire. On one side, farmers demanding the bounty system continue or they'd go bankrupt. On the other, the public, the press, and environmentalists calling the government heartless and barbaric. The situation became increasingly unstable. Eventually, the government had no choice but to end the bounty program. Now the farmers were left alone against the emus. It was another crushing blow. They felt betrayed, no longer sure who the real enemy was, the birds or their own government. Meanwhile, the emu population kept growing. From just 20,000 birds in 1932, a number ballooned into the hundreds of thousands within a few years. Some experts warned that if nothing was done, emus could displace other species and take over the ecosystem. Once again, the question arose: who truly rules this land, humans or nature? And though the official war was over, the real struggle was only beginning. This was no longer a fight for crops. It became a fight for the right to control the land, without being defeated by birds, who had now become symbols of wild Australia. Australia seemed like a nation losing control of its own territory. After the bounty program ended, farmers faced catastrophe alone. The emus, impossible to fence out or eliminate, continued to roam freely, leaving scorched fields behind. And here lies the irony. The more the government tried to control the situation, the more chaotic it became. In some regions, strange incidents started happening. Farmers began faking kills, attaching tags to old corpses and claiming new bounties. Others fought among themselves, accusing neighbors of stealing their rewards. The system was collapsing from within. At the same time, a new wave of thinking emerged in Australia. Emus began to be seen not as pests, but as part of the country's cultural identity. Artists, poets, and even politicians started using the image of the emu as a symbol of resistance and independence. Schools held lessons about the birds. Museums launched temporary exhibits, and graffiti began to appear on city walls. Emus, the true rulers of the land. All of this unfolded alongside a growing distrust in the government, now blamed for incompetence and national embarrassment. While cities debated symbolism and art, a very different reality was unfolding in the rural heartland. In one such incident, a farming family in Western Australia lost nearly their entire annual crop overnight when over 200 emus broke through an old fence and destroyed the entire field. In desperation, the head of the household tried to defend the farm with a rifle, but was knocked down and severely injured. The incident made the local news, sparking a fresh wave of outrage. People began asking, what if emus aren't just wild birds, but a kind of biological weapon that humans have no chance against? And just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, the Australian Parliament brought up the idea of radical action. One hardline MP proposed building not just fences around farms, but a massive barrier over 1,000 kilometers long, separating wild lands from farmland. At first, everyone laughed. But then the idea gained traction. The project was called the Emu Barrier, and it quickly started moving forward as the only solution to regain control. While politicians debated billions in funding, farmers took matters into their own hands. They installed metal mesh, spikes, even electric fences. Some communities created homemade alarm systems that triggered sirens when emus approached. But nature struck back. Again, emus learned to bypass obstacles, find weak spots, sneak in at night, or hide in bushes, waiting for the right moment. People realized this war had no clear front line. It was a battle of instinct versus intellect, and it was still unclear who would win. Then rumors began to spread in some rural communities. Some said the emus were coordinating. that they had some kind of signal system, even strategic behavior. An elderly farmer claimed he saw an emu stand on a hill, give out a loud cry, and immediately the flock changed direction. Scientists laughed, but those who lost crops day after day were no longer laughing. The birds seemed to be playing their own game and winning. Years passed. Those who had started the Great Emu War in 1932 were now gone or had come to terms with it. But the story was not forgotten. In fact, it became a legend, not just a funny tale, but a powerful reminder of how humans can lose to nature, even with weapons, armies, and money. Eventually, the government officially acknowledged defeat. Documents, reports, statistics, all pointed to one fact: the birds had won. More than that, emus eventually became a protected species. The same government that once sent machine guns into the fields now funded research programs to better understand emu behavior and their role in the ecosystem. It was one of those rare moments where yesterday's enemy becomes a national treasure. Today, more than 500,000 of these elusive giants live in Australia. They still cross farmland, still nibble at crops, but they no longer cause the panic they once did. Why? Because farmers changed their strategy. Instead of trying to exterminate the birds, they built infrastructure, solid fences, surveillance systems, agricultural tech. Where once there was conflict, now there is adaptation. Humans didn't conquer nature, they learned to live with it. But behind this outward harmony, one truth remains unspoken. This war exposed the fragility of the system. It showed how unprepared people are for unconventional threats. A government that first ignored the farmers, then used them, and finally abandoned them, lost public trust for years. The story became a lesson, not just about wildlife management, but about how bureaucracy, arrogance, and rash decisions can turn a simple problem into a national embarrassment. And perhaps the most remarkable part of the entire saga is how future generations interpreted it. Young Australians often joke about the war, creating memes and comics. Tourists come to see the emus as symbols of resilience, and some still say, the real winner of that war wasn't just a bird, it was nature itself. Because unlike humans, the emus never tried to upset the balance. They simply went where the food was. And if humans had shown more reason and less pride from the start, there might never have been a war at all. In conclusion, the Great Emu War isn't just a strange chapter in Australia's history. It's a philosophical symbol, a powerful reminder of how easily humans can lose when they underestimate their opponent, especially when that opponent is nature itself. So next time you see a funny meme online that says Australia lost a war to birds, remember, behind the joke lies a bitter and sobering truth, a story of how a peaceful farm became a battlefield, how the government sent an army against birds and lost. And perhaps, just perhaps, that war forever changed Australia's relationship with the wild. Because sometimes, to survive, you don't have to win. You just have to learn to coexist.